Welcome to the False Friends Lightning Round. We're going to zip through 10 examples of false friends in the King James Version. Understandest thou what thou readest? We'll find out. 1, 2, 3, ready, set. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, go. Number 11 in my list. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be once named among you as becometh saints, neither filthiness nor foolish talking nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. Ephesians 5, 3-4. There is a pretty obvious contextual conflict here. Filthiness, foolish talking, and the kind of coarse jesting Paul is warning against are far more than inconvenient by our modern use of that term. They are sin. What's less obvious, indeed I couldn't guess but had to look it up, is what the King James translators meant by convenient. My trusty American Heritage Dictionary, the contemporary dictionary I prefer to use most often, happens to record the obsolete sense in this case. I have certainly never heard it in my life, but clearly this obsolete sense fits here in the King James perfectly. Fitting and proper, suitable. I don't even need to check the Oxford English Dictionary, and since this is the lightning round, I won't. Convenient is a false friend. Fitting is a more fitting translation today. 12. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait on our ministering, or he that teacheth on teaching. There was a lady in an outreach ministry that I was pastoring for a number of years who came to me one time holding her King James Version and looking at Romans 12 and asking me, what does this mean that if I have the gift of ministering, I should wait to use it? I thought, I wonder in the world what is going on. We took a look, and sure enough, we discovered a false friend. Let's take a look. The Oxford English Dictionary entry for this deceptively simple word wait is actually rather lengthy, and you've got to scroll down all through the current and historical senses down to the phrasal verbs. A phrasal verb is a verb in which another word like after or for or of is part of the construction. And so we go down to wait on, which is what we have in the King James, and we go down to sense for under there, and we see to attend to a business or a duty. That is, in fact, what Tyndall's translation of this very verse said, let him that hath an office wait on his office, and this sense is obsolete. We have a false friend. Number 13, Proverbs 22:28. Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. Of course, there's a contextual conflict here, but I most certainly didn't notice it. While making this video, I actually noticed another sort of false friend that helped me misread this verse over the years. And the King James translators noticed the possibility of my future misunderstanding. A landmark has, for many centuries, had two different senses. The Oxford English Dictionary mentions them as the boundary of a country or a state, that is, an object set up to mark a boundary line, and any conspicuous object which characterizes a neighborhood or district, like a statue or a particular colorful building in downtown Charleston. But in modern America, it's only that second sense where I encounter the word landmark. I don't hear the word landmark being used to speak of boundary lines, or at least not very often. I've heard the word stakes being used to talk about that, because that's what we use, literal physical stakes. It is much, much more common for this word landmark to mean a conspicuous object characterizing a particular area, like a big tree or a particular statue or building. So I always took landmark here in Proverbs 22:28 to mean that, and I therefore expected remove. I mean, this all happens so fast. In the blink of an eye, your mind is going through this process. I expected remove to mean pranksters making off with the statue or cutting down the tree in the night. The Hebrew word here, gabul, means boundary. It doesn't mean that second sense of landmark. And if I had had an original King James Version, I might have seen that in the margin they put or bound. Aha, they're tipping me off as to which sense they meant. But I don't ever remember seeing that. If I had, I might have noticed that it's kind of odd to warn against removing, that is, getting rid of boundary markers. Someone's just going to come and put up another one in its place. What Proverbs is warning against is moving boundary markers and thereby stealing land from your neighbor. And it just so happens that remove used to be used in the sense of move. Here's the Oxford English Dictionary. Someone in 1633, for example, could say, we will remove nearer the court. And what they meant was they were going to move closer to the court. The Oxford English Dictionary marks this sense as now somewhat archaic. I feel we can safely drop the somewhat. I've never heard anyone say this. Remove not the ancient landmark means don't steal your neighbor's land by moving a boundary marker. I've heard this verse many times used as a rallying cry by advocates for the exclusive use of the King James Version. It's ironic and a little sad then that they are being tripped up by a false friend. Number 14, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Today this means their answer was not prepared with thought and attention. In 1611 it meant they weren't worried about answering. They weren't full of care. This is an easy one to find in the Oxford English Dictionary if you think to look for it. Here it is, full of care, trouble, anxiety, or concern, anxious, troubled, solicitous, concerned, and it is marked as archaic. I've never heard the word careful used in the way the King James translators use it there, except in the King James. And it's interesting to me that the American Heritage Dictionary, though it does give this sense, the citation it gives is actually from the King James Version. I'd rather say this is an archaic sense, an obsolete one that is simply no longer used in contemporary English. Number 15, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit. Today, to spoil someone means to ruin them, like spoiling milk or spoiling a rotten child with too many toys. In 1611, this meant to rob or plunder. To the victor go the spoils. We still have a word related to that, but we don't use the verb that way very often. There are two similar senses in the OED that could be at play here. I think this is the one that's being used: to seize goods by force or violence, to carry off as spoil, to rob or steal, to take out of or away improperly, and it is marked as obsolete or archaic. In the judgment of the OED lexicographers, the King James Bible does use this sense of the word spoil in the verb form in Mark 3:27. Again, I think that's what's going on here. It's marked as obsolete or archaic, which means that no one today will, hearing that verb in that context, take it to mean this sense. It is, in other words, a false friend. The contemporary translations pretty universally go with, see that no one takes you captive. Number 16, masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal. Today, this means that masters should give all servants the same wage. In 1611, it meant they should all get what they deserve. The most responsible New Testament Greek to English lexicon says that this word means a state of being fair or fairness. It even cites Colossians 4:1 and renders this word fairness, which is just how all of the modern translations do it. And it just so happens that the Oxford English Dictionary gives fairness as a sense of equal, fair, equitable, just, impartial. And it says this sense is obsolete. We have another false friend. Number 17, men shall be incontinent. Today this means men will lose control of their bowels. In 1611, it meant lacking in self-restraint. You kind of have to follow me here and maybe remember what C.S. Lewis said about dangerous senses, something I mentioned in previous videos. The major sense of a word in our minds is the one that first occurs to us, and if it works, we go with it without a second thought. Obviously, some readers will realize that loss of control of one's bowels just doesn't work well in this context, which is a list of sins, not a list of punishments. Men shall be without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, etc. Those are sins. And I have to acknowledge that both the American Heritage Dictionary and Merriam-Webster still give lacking self-control as one of the senses of the word incontinent. In other words, to this day, people use the word to mean that, which is precisely what the Greek word means. Akrates means without self-control. I also have to acknowledge that the Oxford English Dictionary does not list lacking self-control as obsolete or archaic. So this example of a false friend is weak. I admit it, I don't think it will trip up everyone, but my English sensibilities as a writer and editor tell me that in a bare list of adjectives like this one, a lot of people, not all, but a lot, are going to misunderstand this word. I don't think I was one of them. I don't think I ever thought this meant unable to retain natural evacuations, in the delicate way the Oxford English Dictionary put it. I think I just kind of read past this in the King James, not really sure what it meant, and sort of assuming that I understood. Not all false friends are false friends to all readers, but we could save nearly any chance of misunderstanding if we just went with what all the modern translations choose, without self-control. Then there's no risk of people misunderstanding. My sense is that the King James translators chose to use a sense of the word incontinent that was understood well in their day, but not in ours. 18. If thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. Today this means the Jews of Esther's day would grow. They would enlarge. In 1611, it meant that they would be released from bondage. The OED has a sense for enlargement that means release from confinement or bondage. I don't know why that isn't marked as obsolete. The American Heritage Dictionary does not list that as one of the possible senses for the word, and maybe I am just poorly educated, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone use the word enlargement to mean set free from bondage. I have heard about prisoners who are at large. I guess that's probably related, but I never would have put those things together. I want to clarify that I don't believe the King James translators made any error here. It's just that English has changed in such a way that the word enlargement no longer means, in that context, what it did back then. It's a false friend. Number 19, he shall not fail nor be discouraged till he have set judgment in the earth. Today this means Christ has set up courts or judicial rule. In 1611 it meant he had established justice, not judgment. Judgment is definitely a possible translation of this word in Isaiah 42, and that is as true today as it was in 1611. But let me tell you why I still think judgment in Isaiah 42:4 in the King James is a false friend. First, if you check other translations, you'll notice that they pretty well all go with till he has established justice in the earth. And justice is one possible rendering given to us by the responsible lexicons. Here's the concise Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, giving us justice as one of the possible, what are called glosses. Second, justice is what makes the best sense in this context. Isaiah, in this servant song, is predicting a time when Christ will set up his rule on earth, and what we look forward to during that time is not judgment so much as justice. But then I know that there is an obsolete sense of that word justice that the OAD reports to me that fits this context perfectly. Look, the right or proper administering of justice. And take a look at some of the example senses. The OED lexicographers cite the King James Version several times as using this sense. I mean, really, how could this word really mean what we mean by judgment in places like this? He doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and widow? No, he's giving them justice. He's not judging them. For I, the Lord, love judgment. He's not saying, I love judgment, because judgment is his strange work, he says elsewhere in Scripture. What he's loving is justice. Clearly, in these places, we have false friends. And in Isaiah 42:4, I think we do as well. Christ will one day judge the world, yes, but our hope is for the justice that judgment will bring. The King James translators did not make a mistake here. They were simply using a sense that was available in their English, but is now obsolete. In other words, not available in ours. Number 20, provide things honest in the sight of all men. Today, this would seem, I actually have a little trouble parsing this construction, to recommend truthfulness. In 1611, honest meant honorable or commendable. The Greek here is a little tough to explain, though, by the way, it's exactly the same in all Greek New Testament editions. There's no textual variant here. But honorable is definitely a possible translation of the Greek. And it just so happens that the Oxford English Dictionary records a now obsolete sense of the word honest that meant precisely that. Honorable, worthy of honor, honorable, commendable. The King James translators were not telling their Elizabethan readers to be honest with others. They were telling them to be honorable in the eyes of others. This is a clear false friend. Contemporary lexicographers in the American Heritage Dictionary and in Merriam-Webster's dictionary think that reputable and respectable, something like that honorable sense, is still hanging on in contemporary English. I'm just not so sure. What I am sure of is that if you ask 100 contemporary readers of the King James Version, without the help of the Oxford English Dictionary, to explain what provide things honest in the sight of all men means, not a single one of them will mention honorable or commendable. They will instead talk about honesty, that is, telling the truth. This is, again, through no fault of the King James translators and through no fault of modern English speakers, a false friend. There you have it, 10 false friends in the King James Version, words that could trip you up if you didn't watch this video, words that we still use but that meant something different in those contexts in 1611.